Mr. Byrd.
Thank you so much for having us here today. This is a pleasure to be with you. It's been an awesome experience to be a part of this, in all honesty, and appreciate this opportunity to visit with you and have so many entrepreneurs and so many business leaders in this room. I, too, am a business owner. I've been in business for over 17 years and understand the difficulties it is to run a business and have a business, and the difficulties that come with government overreach and government regulation. Those are things that we battle every single day. Taxes on small businesses that squash and grind on small businesses. This is very difficult. So a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in the Uinta Basin. My business is in the energy industry. For the last 17 years, that's what I've been doing. But I've also purchased other businesses that are failing, going bankrupt. This is a knack that I have to see the complex problems with businesses and fix those, turn those around. This is what I've done. My first taste in politics was a little over 10 years ago when I decided to do my civic duty, give back to my community, and run a city council. When I got elected, I saw that there was corruption and a rat's nest there. I had a decision to make, whether or not to battle that and root that out, or to go along, to get along, and fall in line, as I was told many times. I battled those things, fought those things. As mayor, we changed everything. We brought transparency, accountability, and trust back to our community. We implemented term limits, something that we all talk about. If you want to talk about career politicians, implement term limits. Put a term and an end to the amount of time that they can be there. We did that in Roosevelt. We implemented committees that involved the community and got the community involved with government, our governance, and making sure that their vision was carried out. And we're there as public servants to make sure that that vision comes to fruition. I will do the same thing at the federal level. Transparency leads to accountability. Accountability leads to trust. And that's what we need to restore in America, and that's what I'm about to do. I'm J.R. Byrd for Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
Clint, thank you to you for being our moderator, and also to Silicon Slopes. Appreciate all the people that are participating with us actually in this room, and also those that are participating online. And it's my privilege to be here with you. I'm Mike Kennedy. I'm running for Congress. And as a family doctor first, I'm a trained healer. As an attorney, I've graduated from law school, took the bar and passed that. Don't hold that against me. Attorneys are not all bad, but we need them as well, so I'm an attorney also. And as an attorney, I'm a trained advocate. I understand the Constitution and understand the law. And also as a small business owner myself, I understand what it's like to make payroll, to have employees, to hire and fire, and to build a business. And I will proudly stand shoulder to shoulder next to these good people on stage. These are outstanding people that I'm sitting with. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The reality is if I could bring all of these people on stage to Washington, D.C. with me, I would love to have that, because frankly, the shenanigans and foolishness that we see in Washington, D.C. are reprehensible. We should see more adult in the room, appropriate behavior, and instead we see clown shows and fundraising efforts that are not moving policies forward. So as a family doctor, as an attorney, and also as a state senator, it's been my privilege to be, as a small business owner, building the economy in the state of Utah, and also as a state legislator, working to make sure that we are keeping the state government out of the business of our good business owners. And subsequently, guess what we have in the state of Utah? We have the #1 economy yet again in the state of Utah, partly because of the state government's efforts to cut taxes, reduce regulations, and mostly because of the great entrepreneurial spirit represented by Silicon Slopes and these good people on stage with me. I'm Mike Kennedy. I'd be honored to have your support as I run for Congress to bring the same attitude and approach that I've approached in my legislating in the state government, also to Washington, D.C., and serve our whole country in that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My first question, and it's kind of unavoidable that we'd have to start the debate with this question, whether we like it or not. We had a former president convicted of 34 felonies in the state of New York based off of a pretty obscure everything, and it never unprecedented everything. I guess the immediate question is, one, what is your reaction to that verdict? And two, do you still support President Trump as the nominee of the Republican Party? And Mr. Pay, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you, Clint. So as one who's spent his entire professional career after the military practicing law, I was disheartened that a prosecutor would run on prosecuting one individual, and I don't believe that any other individual, Mr. Bragg would have prosecuted any other individual under this situation. With that being said, I think we have to look at the constitutional protections that are set up, that were set up by the founders that are carried out today. And I can't quote it exactly, but a long time ago, John Adams made a comment that the jury system, and the jury specifically, was the last, along with representative government, was the last protection of freedom, the last protection of all of us being, I believe he uses the term, driven like hogs. And I think that, when you look at it from that perspective, and you think about what that means, Mr. Trump was given those opportunities. He was judged by, or I shouldn't say judged, the facts were reviewed by, or presented to a jury of his peers. They went ahead, they looked at that evidence, and they came to a verdict. And I believe that we have to respect that verdict. I believe that if we are going to start tearing down the institutions, including the judicial part of this country, we are looking at a very dangerous,
Sorry about that.
no problem, a very dangerous perspective. So I feel at this time that Mr. Trump was given that opportunity. He will be allowed to appeal. You use the term, and I use the term describing the charges. I think he's going to have some decent appellate grounds based on kind of the strange nature of the charges, and we'll see how that goes forward.
Mr. Byrd.
Oh, I'm next?
Wait, it says go to left to right. I assume that's your left. So
Perfect.
we're going.
I like it. No, thank you. So this is something that started not just a few years ago. This is something that started when Trump got elected. If you look at the Mueller report, if you look at the Russian collusion, if you look at the quid pro quo with Ukraine, and the things that Trump was charged of, even when he first got elected in 2016, those began to breed doubt in the American people because they were chasing things that the Mueller report ended up being falsified heavily. And so that immediately instilled doubt in the American people of whether or not Trump is actually being indicted for things that are real, or if it's just political expediency. And this is the danger in everything that I've seen surrounding Trump, is it's not about justice, it's not about the legal system playing out and being fair to all and be administered fairly to all. It is has been weaponized as a tool to eliminate, in my opinion, a competitor. Now, I agree somewhat with what Stuart Pay has said, where we have to honor those decisions, and there are ways to fight those battles, and we need to make sure that we maintain the rule of law and we maintain decency in these things. But it's obvious to see that this is a tool being weaponized against a certain person, and it's happened for years. 8 years now this has happened. And so the second part of that question is, do I support Trump as the nominee? And yes, I do. Unless there is something that he has found of that eliminates him from being the nominee and president, then I will support him in that. And so thank you for that question.
Mr. Dougal.
If you serve in office, you have a duty to the Constitution. Your duty is not to an individual. It's to that document and what's espoused in it. The greater concern is not what took place recently. From my perspective, the greater concern is what took place on January 6th. You saw the assault on the constitutional process, the attempt to stop the counting of the Electoral College votes, a president who sat on his hands for hours while that took place to further staying in office. My duty is to the Constitution, and that is why I called him seditious on January 6th, in his attempt to undercut our constitutional government. That was dangerous. The Republican Party used to be the party of big ideas. Unfortunately, today, what are we? We're the party of opposition. We need to get back to being the party of big ideas so we can coalesce. Think about it when you start up a business, okay? If you've got a great vision of where you're going, you can coalesce a team to drive in that direction. If you don't, you got a lot of squabbling and infighting, and you don't know where you're headed. And that's one of our problems right now in Washington, D.C. The Republican Party does not know where it's going. Too many are swearing loyalty to one individual rather than their duty to the Constitution and setting a vision for a better future to save that American dream. Like I said, I come from the perspective of, it's not my job to micromanage your lives. It's my job to get government off your back and out of your wallet, and that's what I've been doing for years as a legislator and as your state auditor. And that's what we need to get back to. We've got a Congress that is bankrupting our country. As I mentioned before, $35 trillion in debt. This is going to crush families. This is going to crush businesses. That's the bigger issue is, are people willing to uphold their duty to the Constitution?
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
Thanks for that question. I kind of thought it might come up, and it is, we live in troubled times, don't we, where lawfare is conducted against the president, in this case, the former president, when, in fact, these misdemeanor charges that were conflated for election interference into a felonious charge, and the shenanigans that went on in that court. We all know how the courts work, is that once a verdict is proclaimed and the jury has made their determination, that at that point it's appealed, and it's appealed again, and it's appealed again. And where will this go? To the New York Supreme Court. Absolutely, it will go there, and likely be challenged at every step of the way. From there, because of the unprecedented, we keep talking about unprecedented and historical nature of this, we'll see an appeal all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And at that point, I believe Donald Trump will be exonerated. I'm the only one in this race that has endorsed Donald Trump. That does not support the behavior in his life, some of these things that we've seen and we find in the state of Utah to be unacceptable as far as behavior. But when it comes to that, Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, and I stand with our Republican nominee. And the reality is that under Donald Trump, our border was not in chaos. It was still a problem, but we had a better border under control. Under Joe Biden, the border's been left to have millions of people come across the border. In addition, we have foreign wars during Joe Biden's administration that we did not have during Donald Trump's administration, because we knew that he was going to prosecute a war to the fullest extent necessary. We had peace in our world as a result of that. And our economy, our inflationary trends and troubles that we've had with out-of-control spending were also better under Donald Trump. I stand with Donald Trump as a Republican nominee, and I want to see him as our next president.
Mr. Lawrence.
Every American, regardless of what you think about Trump, regardless of your political affiliation or your party, should be concerned about our legal system being manipulated and weaponized to go after political opponents, especially a political opponent that is running against a sitting president who stands above that justice system. The optics and the substance of this, in this case, are concerning. Any objective legal mind who's looked at this case has come to the same conclusion, that it is flimsy, it lacks substance, that no one except Donald J. Trump would be convicted on this charge. It is a blatant effort of political enemies to persecute someone using the law, and that needs to stop. Look, I'm running on a message of restoring the American dream, and part of that is restoring faith and confidence in our institutions. The progressive left in this country is intent on degrading those institutions. We've seen it with the Supreme Court. We're seeing here with our justice system. We have to stand firm against that regardless of who is being persecuted. Look, I don't endorse all of Donald Trump's behavior and his antics, but he is our Republican nominee. And as such, I support him. I could have supported DeSantis. I could have supported Haley if they had been the nominee, but they're not. As Republicans, I believe we need to be smarter team players. We need to get over ourselves and work together as a team to get things done and to win in Washington, D.C. For the first time in history, we have two former presidents battling for the presidency who have 4 years of sample size, an example that we can look at, we can hold up, we can compare and contrast, and we can draw decisions from. There is no question that our 4 years under Donald Trump were better than the last 4 years under Biden. What we can't do is elect Biden for another 4 years. We need to unite as Republicans now and win. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Just real quick before we go to the next question, does anybody not support Trump on the stage?
I've refused to endorse anybody.
Okay. Next question. Congress recently passed a huge aid package to Ukraine. It's not the first, may not be the last. There's a report recently that President Biden is now authorizing the use of U.S. Weapons to be used inside of Russia. This is something that if one of you get in, you're definitely going to have to focus on and vote on. What do you think of this war? Do you think it's appropriate, President Biden's decision recently to authorize the use of U.S. weapons being into into Russia, apologies? And should it continue? Should we continue sending him money? Mr. Lawrence, we'll start with you.
When I talk about the Ukraine conflict, I think it's important to talk about it in two different aspects. The first is the cause, and the second is the cost. Let me be unabashed and unequivocal in what I think about the cause in Ukraine. It is just. I've been inspired by the Ukrainian freedom fighters, by their bravery, their courage. They have fought on in the face of a powerful military, and they've done their best. We as Americans need to support their cause for freedom. Now, when it comes to cost, that's a different matter. But I don't believe in foreign aid. I believe in foreign investment. We should look at and consider American interests in the conflict in Ukraine to guide our investments in that area. The reality is that with less than 3% of our military budget over the last 3 years, we have decimated over half of the Russian military fighting force. We have dealt a serious blow to their economy. And I think by any objective measure, that investment that we have made as Americans, not to mention those of our allies in Europe, has been effective and has yielded fruit. In the future, whether I would support future aid to Ukraine, that's going to depend on facts on the ground and how they affect American interests. And let me be very clear, we have significant interests in Europe, in NATO, and across the globe. The world is increasingly fraught, and it's fraught because of the weakness of our current president, Joe Biden, who is absolutely incapable of projecting any kind of deterrence on the world stage. And the thing about deterrence is it's really not divisible. We have to be a strong deterrent force across the globe and not pick and choose which skirmish with our allies we're going to support or not. I am an advocate of a strong American presence on the world stage, and I will take that back to Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
Ukraine and their efforts to prosecute their war, I'm very supportive of that. The reality is Joe Biden and his feckless administration with their Afghani withdrawal started this process. It sent a message to dictators all over the world that the United States was asleep at the switch. We had a president that was weak and powerless and willing to let almost anything happen. And what have we seen since that time? We've seen dictators all over the world on the move as a result of Joe Biden and his feckless presidency. So as a result, we need a strong president. But when it comes to Ukraine, I am supportive of those people's efforts to fight their way and prosecute their war forward to its fullest extent. The United States of America has great technology, outstanding capacity to support them, but it is not our job to fund every war throughout the world. We do not have the money. Our grandchildren do not have the money for us to fund wars all over the world. If we're going to help Ukraine, we can help them best with United States technology that we can, on loan, put it on a tab, or we can sell them those resources. Ukraine is obviously cash-strapped. They're in the middle of a war. The reality is we seize Russian assets and make Russia pay for the mess that they've put us in into this circumstance. I'm very supportive of that. But as to sending our young men and young women into the field of conflict when a direct national security interest is not implicated, I utterly refuse to do that. This is Europe's back door. They should step up and support Ukraine in their efforts to prosecute this war and keep Vladimir Putin at bay. And it is not the United States' direct responsibility, but I stand with and support sending resources in the form of bombs, bullets, medicines, and planes to Ukraine, but make Russia pay for it. That's the way we ought to do this.
Mr. Dugal.
So when we think about Ukraine, the key objective from the United States perspective is our own national security. Our focus should be on what does it take to make sure that we are not attacked by Russia. I do not want American boots on the ground there, clearly. But one of the key things that we have to realize is this is about more than just Ukraine and Russia. And this is about more than just Joe Biden's failing administration. Are we well prepared for the next threat? I don't think we are. There's a good chance that's China. It could be Russia. Clearly, Iran wants to attack us in one form or fashion, especially through proxies. We are not well situated for the emerging threats. We're not well situated militarily. We're flat-footed. We have a shrinking military. We've been riding on the coattails of Ronald Reagan from the 80s. We've got an eroded industrial base. Think about what it takes to produce munitions, boats, planes, drones, and so forth. We're struggling as an economy. We are not well situated. When it comes to rare earth elements, we're largely beholden to China. These are critical not just for our economy, but for our military. Yet we can produce that here in America. Rather than Biden's misguided agenda when it comes to the environment, we should be extracting those resources right here in America, strengthening our economy, strengthening our military. Reagan talked about peace through strength, and that's how we're going to have peace, through strength.
Thank you. Mr. Byrd.
Thank you. Well, I have a little bit different outlook on Ukraine than most of my colleagues here. First of all, the question was, would we support that omnibus bill or that bill going to aid Ukraine? And my answer is no, and I'll explain that. First of all, the war with Ukraine and Russia, we need to fight that war on all fronts, meaning we have sanctioned Russia to a large degree on their oil production or oil sales. But there are loopholes in those sanctions. Oil is still going to different foreign countries being refined. We're buying some of that fuel that's being refined by foreign countries. We have a president that also put a freeze on, or a pause on permits to allow LNG exports to go to Europe. If we don't allow Europe, or we don't sell that gas to Europe, they're going to buy that from Russia. So we are indirectly, by loose sanction, and it's been mentioned a little bit before by our president, we're allowing Russia to be funded on the backside. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to send aid to Ukraine while allowing Russia to be funded on the backside. If we're going to do this, we need to do this in a coordinated effort. We need to make sure we have massive sanctions on Russia. We need to close up all those loopholes. We need to starve them out. And then we need an accountability of the funds that we are sending to Ukraine and making sure that what those funds are doing are moving the needle in the direction that we anticipate for our national security. The other thing that concerns me with the conflict in Ukraine, we've mentioned, well, we've decimated Russia's military. What are we doing to America's military? Is this a tactic for them to engage the United States, weaken the United States, so that when China decides to invade Taiwan, we're in a much worse position than we would have otherwise been? We need to be looking at this from every angle. And I think right now, until a lot of those things are identified and a lot of those sanctions are put on like they need to be, those massive sanctions, until we start to identify these other areas that we can fight this war, including NATO, and making sure that they're packing their fair share in this conflict, we need to be very cautious. And again, how are we to continue to fund these conflicts when we don't even have our own house in order? We need to get our house in order, and we need to make sure that we are strong as Americans.
Thank you. Mr. Pei.
Thank you, Clint. All right, so I'll start with your first question, or your second question, because nobody's answered it. Should we allow the Ukrainians to use certain weapons to fire on the other side of the Russian border? I'll tell you, in the last 100 years, no one's won a war at the front lines. Combat 101 is you have to hit them deep. You have to hit their supply centers. You have to use those weapons. That's why for the last 30 years, we've spent billions of dollars figuring out how to build those weapons, and why those weapons destroy the Russians every time we give them to them. For those of you that followed the news a couple of days, the Kharkiv offensive that the Russians launched has been stopped dead in its tracks. That is not because of something that happened at the front line. It's because of what they've been able to use the HIMARS and the ATACMS missiles to hit deep behind those Russian enemy lines. We should require that. Second thing, speaking of the last 100 years, there's been two bullies before Putin. One, we bowed to Adolf Hitler. It worked out really well, didn't it? The second one was the Soviets. I'm sorry. I served a mission in Russia, so this is an emotional issue for me. The second one was the Russians. Men like Harry Truman, President Eisenhower, President Nixon, President Reagan stood face to face with them, stared them down, and said, "No, not on my watch." The Russians never came across that border. We have to do the same thing to the Russians today. To do otherwise would be to duck the duty that we've been given as a free country an ocean away. Which leads to, should we continue to support them, and what should we continue to do? Yeah, we should continue to support them. We have a duty, like I said. First of all, we shouldn't send, there was been mention of sending our boys over there. The way to avoid sending our boys over there is to arm the Ukrainians to the teeth and let them do the job as they've proven they can do. If you ever get a chance to go to Kyiv, the Kyiv World War II Museum is the coolest place I've ever been. They have an exhibit there which talks about the Ukrainians fighting the Russians in the morning and the Nazis at night in 1945. That's the type of people we're talking about. Finally, I would say this. If we don't do that, we will show a weakness to the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and the North Koreans that they've been looking for decades. It's time for America to be the leader that we are. I will just line with one last story. I was in Baghdad when 1st Cavalry Division relieved 1st Armored Division. I was standing next to a British intelligence officer who'd fought all over the world, been in every conflict you can imagine since 1980. When 1st Cav rolled down the road, he turned to me, he said, "Stuart, you guys are bloody awesome. It's your leadership that allows freedom to go forward today. If we duck that responsibility, we will have ducked the leadership of men like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. We can't do that now. We shouldn't do it tomorrow."
Thank you so much. Gentlemen, we only had 2 questions because we thought you guys would fight amongst yourselves a little bit more. So with your permission, I would love to ask you another one. Is that okay?
Did you want us to fight among ourselves?
Preferably, it would have made great television for us.
I can call somebody
Stuart,
names.
Stuart, you've got great experience.
So I want to turn basically the same question, but to a different part of the world, and that is Israel and what's happening in Gaza. What are your thoughts on what's happening in Gaza? And what are your thoughts on how this might be brought to an end, if at all? We'll start with you, Mr. Pei.
I've been first before. I just don't want to get yelled at because we got out of order once and somebody got upset.
I think it's, go ahead.
I'm happy to go first. So on October 7th, the Hamas decided they wanted to play a tough game. They wanted to take the Israelis on, and they wanted to mess with the bull, and they got that. But I think from an American perspective, we need to look at this 2 ways. I think number one, Hamas was trained, funded, and inspired by the Iranians. As I mentioned a moment ago, that's one of the 4 pillars, I believe, out there coalescing against America. So we need to stand with the Israelis against the Iranians for sure. We need to let the world know this is what we're doing. Secondly, I'll tell you, in Iraq, I got to work with the Jordanians and the Qataris quite a bit. They're smart people. They're pragmatic people, at least by the standards of that part of the world. We need to make sure that those countries and others like them are willing to be involved there. We can't be the lone leader. We can't be telling the Israelis what to do. We've got to build a coalition of people in that part of the world, and they owe us, and we need to call in those debts. With respect to the Israelis and how far they should go, that's a hard one for America to really talk about. I remember on the morning of September 11th, sitting with my friends, and actually I got a call from a kid by the name of John Darrington, good friend of mine. We both knew that our lives were about to change. We were in the same guard unit. About a year and a half later, we'd both be deployed separately, unfortunately. But when your nation is struck, and we need to think about that, it was only 23 years ago that was us, you're going to react, and you're going to want revenge, and you're going to want peace. Now, in our case, that meant going to Afghanistan, which is a lot different than going for the Israelis to go to Gaza, which is just next door. Have the Israelis done some things that U.S. Army officers would be court-martialed for? Yes. Should those activities stop? Yes. Should the Israelis continue to take the fight to Hamas? Yes. That's got to be our stance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pei. Mr. Lawrence.
There is a clear mission and objective in Israel that Israel should support, we in America should support. It's in the interest of the Middle East and in the interest of global security generally, and that is the elimination of Hamas. We cannot allow voices and forces to obfuscate that mission. It's a moral mission, and nothing will lead to greater safety and security in Israel and currently in the Middle East than doing that. We cannot allow distraction from that mission. Look, we also can't trust these forces and voices that are giving us information. A lot of the information about facts on the ground in Gaza is coming from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas. Just recently, a few weeks ago, the casualty numbers of civilians in Hamas was adjusted downward 50% from the numbers given to us by the Gaza Ministry of Health. We have to give Israel the benefit of the doubt in this conflict. Certainly, they need to be accountable to the rules of engagement and the rules of war, but we need to stand with them as our ally. Look, not only are we Israel's greatest ally, but Israel is our greatest ally and asset in the Middle East, and a key to American interests there and safety and security there. I will be a voice and continue to be a voice in Congress of strengthening our relationship with Israel and standing by them. One thing that's inexcusable and should be a concern to everyone in this country is the degree to which our current president, Joe Biden, has flirted with his support to Israel. One day it's one thing, the next day it's another. And that flirting has allowed a degree of anti-Semitism to be countenanced and normalized in this country, unlike anything we've seen since World War II. We need to awake to that. We need to be full-throated in speaking against it. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy.
I stand firmly with Israel as a democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, and as a generational ally. Israel has the right to prosecute this war to its fullest extent for its very existence. The Hamas attack was an atrocity that should be in the history books as one of the worst in the history of modern society, and Israel entirely should be able to move forward with United States support, again, with weapons and medicines, resources that are necessary for them to prosecute the war. And once again, young men and young women from the United States of America going there? Absolutely not. It is not in our national security interest for us to send our soldiers to Israel, but as the only democracy in the Middle East, as a generational ally and as a partner with us for many decades, I stand firmly with Israel in their ability to prosecute this war. We all understand, though, when terrible things happen, that there's a tendency to want to seek revenge and go too far. None of us on this stage, myself included, are interested or willing to support the destruction of lives in the form of innocent women and children. And I do believe with the chaos of war, understanding some about how that is that will sadly always happen, but Israel is prosecuting this war in an effort to minimize the death of innocent people and at the same time fight for its very existence. So when it comes to that, I stand firmly with Israel, to provide to them every resource necessary for them to fight for their existence, and would do that throughout my congressional service because of the nature of our alliance that we've had with them for many decades.
Thank you. Mr. Dugal.
So think about what happened in Israel and compare that to 9/11. Would we just sit there and take it and get lectured by countries around the world about how we responded to defend ourselves? Israel needs to prosecute this war. Hamas attacked them. Hamas still has hostages. In fact, Hamas still has American hostages. And I wonder where the current administration is when it comes to recovering those American hostages. It's reprehensible for us to sit on our hands. It's reprehensible for the president to withhold weapons and munitions from Israel. Israel should not be beholden to a fickle president and a dysfunctional Congress. What I want is stronger relationships between Americans and Israelis, economically, militarily. Israel too often is treated as a province of the U.S., at the beck and call of whatever the U.S. wants them to do or not do. And that's not right. They should be treated as an independent country, defending their rights, protecting their very existence, and recovering their hostages.
Thank you. Mr. Byrd.
Yes, so I would like to talk a little bit about how we got in this conflict anyway, and it leads to the weakness of our president. So a few months back, we saw where $6 billion was going to allow to be funneled back to Iran through Qatar for oil purchases and things like that were sanctioned. But before that, almost $70 billion funneled back to Iran. Before that even happened and before this attack happened. That funded and it helped fund Hamas's attack on Israel. Part of that attack is a result from a weak presidency, and we need to make sure that we are doing everything on the backside to avoid and eliminate these things from even happening. Now that they have happened, Israel is definitely an ally to the United States, much different than Ukraine. Our relationship with Israel goes back to 1948. It was reinforced with Ronald Reagan in 1984. And it's something that benefits the United States and benefits Israel. It's been said that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and that is true. And we gain a lot from working with Israel, both militarily, both economically. There is a tight relationship. And again, they want to be able to fight this war. They want to be able to win this war. They want to be able to protect themselves, and we need to make sure that we're allowing them that to happen and not getting too involved. I've talked to many Jews that are concerned that other countries are going to get involved and affect the outcome. They need to be allowed to fight this war on their own terms. Now, I am for a two-party state, and that's something that's going to be difficult to talk about right now, but a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, we need to work towards that. We also need to make sure that we're talking to the other countries in that area and helping them come to the table and talk about economic and military coordination in that area. And so I'm 100% behind Israel. I agree that we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful not to have innocent lives lost, but I fully support Israel.
Thank you. Now we will do 2-minute closing statements for each of you. We will do the reverse order of how we started. So, Dr. Kennedy, it's the first time I called you doctor. Apologies. I've been saying Mr. Dr. Kennedy, the floor is yours.
Clint, thanks for having me here, and thanks for allowing me to share this very close stage with these people. Usually we're not so close as we are, but I am happy to share shoulders with really good patriotic people, and that includes my friend off to the right. I about an hour ago had a meeting with the Department of Corrections, and in fact, it reminded me in that meeting, because I'm a state senator, the potency of state government. In fact, what we talked about is the upcoming execution of a citizen of the state of Utah because of heinous crimes that were committed by this individual. The power of the state government, the power of the federal government, not only to take life, but also to destroy business, which we saw in COVID, and with COVID lockdowns, destruction of business, to ruin our economy with inflationary spending, the power actually to declare war and send our young men and young women into conflicts is a weighty task, a task that should be borne by people that understand what it means to bear that task. And on this stage are very good people, and I will, with great esteem, give them respect for the remainder of my life, for the type of people that they are. But there's only 2 of us on the stage that have ever legislated at all, and there's only 1 in the past decade that's done any legislating, and that's me. And as a result of legislation that I've passed, I've had death threats on my phone. And if you'd like to listen to those death threats, I've got them still as a museum piece that I can share with you. It's disgusting, the type of violence that has been threatened against me, and my home was vandalized as a result of legislation that I've passed as well. The reality of going to Washington, D.C. and taking on the power of what our federal government can do, in addition to what I've dealt with in the past decade as a state legislator, is weighty. It's a task that should not be given to people that are inexperienced in that. With all due respect to my opponents, who are great people, and I acknowledge that fact, the reality for me is that I bring to you a set of experience and skills that would allow me to serve you well in bearing that weight. The heat and the pressure of Washington, D.C. is not something for the faint of heart. It's not something for somebody who's never done it before. I'm Mike Kennedy. I'm at MikeKennedy4Utah.com. That's MikeKennedyForUtah.com. And I would love to have your support. 3 weeks from today, I won't have as many close contacts with these good colleagues of mine, and I can't say that I'll miss them all that much, although I've really enjoyed working with them and hope to continue to work with them on some level. But I hope to earn your vote. I'm Mike Kennedy. Thank you very much for your time and attention to what we've had to say here today. Thank you.
Mr. Byrd.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I would like to clarify, being a mayor, we do, and being a city councilman, we do legislate at the local level. And I'll tell you, legislating at the local level helps you understand how the decisions you make directly impact the people
that you serve. And I have seen some heavy-handed approach from the state legislature to cities and municipalities and counties. And that does concern me, because if you're doing that at a state level, then that means that's going to be exacerbated at the federal level. Understanding how the decisions you make directly affect those you serve is very important at the federal level. The other thing that I will mention is being one of the only candidates who has that local level experience gives me good insight to be able to, again, be able to relate to people. I'm a small business owner, being able to relate to the small businesses in the room and create legislation there. Having had to balance a budget and having created several businesses and fixed several businesses, the budget issues that we do face are critical, and we need somebody who understands those complex problems. You know, this is not anything I ever would have wanted to do, but I can tell you right now, one of the major things that we lack, and we've done this here in Roosevelt, is the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, and actually following constitutional law, following our codes and processes. If we were to get back to that, we would eliminate 90% of our problems. That's what I've done in Roosevelt. That's what I'll do at the federal level. I ask for your vote, birdforcongress.com. And again, this has been a wild ride, a very good experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you. I'll happily cede the debate to these gentlemen to argue over who's been a politician longer. I definitely am not, and I'm happy to call attention to that. Look, over the last 10 years, no economy has grown faster, emerged more clearly, and shined more brightly than our Silicon Slopes economy right here in Utah. I'm proud to be part of that economy, and just as rapidly, we have seen how policy in Washington, D.C., especially how that has led to rapid escalation of our interest rates and inflation, has decimated our Silicon Slopes economy. We're not in good shape right now, and we need to revamp, and we need to get back on the right track. Look, I am someone who understands the economy. I understand how to create jobs because I've done it. I understand the dynamics and the incentives that lead to growth in business because I've done it. I will be a representative you in Silicon Slopes can send to Washington, D.C., who will understand the pressure you're under, who will understand what needs to be done to grow our economy. I will make that the priority it always should be for us here in Utah. Again, my name is Case Lawrence. I'm asking for your vote. You can find more about me at caselawrence.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dougal.
America is a startup. It's a startup venture. The founders had a bold idea of what we could be. And right now, we're at a critical point. Will that concept, will that idea, will that grand experiment be successful? Or will it fail like so many other countries along the way? We're at a turning point. Are we going to restore America to its greatness? Are we going to bring fiscal sanity to Washington, D.C.? Are we going to get government off people's backs and out of their wallets so that you can run your lives? I tell folks that Congress has two responsibilities, budgeting and oversight, and it's failing at both. And budgeting and oversight is what I've done, both as a legislator, championing some of the largest tax cuts in Utah history and the most significant tax reform in generations, in fact, we still have it today, to oversight as your auditor, rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption, and helping you hold your government accountable. We're sitting here with a dysfunctional Congress that's failing the American people. Ronald Reagan talked about that shiny city on a hill, an example to nations around the world. My friend Sarah talks about that shiny home at the edge of a cul-de-sac, where her kids can get married and start a family, have a job and provide, and live a great life and being examples to their neighbors. That's part of what it means in the American dream. And for you guys in Silicon Slopes, what that means is starting a business, taking a little venture and growing it and making it successful and changing the world. And that's what America has done. It has changed the world for the better. But it's up to each one of us to carry that vision forward. And right now is the point to decide. I'm John Dougal, Frugal Dougal. Go to votefrugal.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Pay.
Thank you, Clint. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in and attending today. As the only person who grew up attending Utah County or Wasatch Front schools, and the only person up here that grew up on the Wasatch Front, I've had a unique opportunity to see the change in the Wasatch Front and in Utah itself. Springville, when I was growing up, was a small, I would argue, rural town. It was a great place. It was an idyllic place to grow up. I was taught principles like duty and honor and loyalty. I was educated well. I had a lot of opportunities. Those opportunities sent me to what I refer to as the three frontiers of freedom in my life. One was St. Petersburg, Russia, 12 months after the Soviet Union ceased to exist. The second was Baghdad, just a couple of months after Saddam Hussein started hiding. And the third one was Kiev, the summer before the war. The opportunities that I had growing up here and seeing the change and then going to those places and realizing what a blessing it was in my life, I think gives me an opportunity to represent what is a very diverse and very unique district. The problems or challenges in Sandy and Draper and Alpine and American Fork and Provo are far different from those in Vernal and in Monticello. I think we need a person from here that grew up here, that lives in this district, that understands exactly what this district is about to represent us. Because as we've talked today, there are choices that are going to have to be made in the next 6 to 8 years that matter. They matter on a national security perspective. They matter on a rule of law perspective. They matter on an economic perspective. I am the only person at this table that I believe can do that based upon my experience in this district. The only time I've ever been here was when I was called to serve a mission, or haven't lived here, is when I was sent by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to Russia, or by Donald Rumsfeld to some faraway place. And I believe those experiences set me apart, and for those reasons, I'd ask for your vote over the next 3 weeks, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking all of the candidates. Best of luck, gentlemen. Really appreciate you being here.